Thank you. So now Commissioner questions. Commissioner Clark.
Thank you. So just a couple of questions around ridership. Mr. McLaren, you had a chart up there that talked about ridership comparisons, and it listed all of the station locations. In that, are we, for those numbers, are we accounting for embarkments or disembarkments at those stations, or one and not the other?
All right, so Chris Breland from Fair and Pierce is here for that
Thanks,
answer.
Chris.
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. I can handle that question. Those are what we term as boardings. So each one of the figures there represents a boarding. There is a corresponding deboarding or a lighting, as we call it sometimes, at a downstream station.
And with those ridership estimates, is there any way that we formulate into this or calculate for how long those boardings might ride on the train? Might they ride one or two stations, or the whole ball of wax, or how do we, and what do we account for those?
Yeah, so in short, the travel patterns for when people get on and off the train are based on the Santa Cruz RTC ridership model, which looks at what are the overall patterns that people make trips for if they're going to work or if they're going to shopping or whatever the case may be. There's an underlying pattern of someone's trying to go from, say, Watsonville to Capitola, for example. That trip makes a choice to ride the train in the model, and it's captured so we can track its boarding and alighting position.
Okay. And maybe you can address this too, but Mr. McLaren was talking about perhaps the idea of starting with hourly service, and then as demand reaches the need, we would then adjust to something like half-hour, 30-minute intervals in service on that. Do you have based on your ridership projections, do you have some idea about how far into that future, once we hit go, how far down the road is it until we anticipate we might reach that kind of ridership to have to start 30-minute intervals? Or do we have an estimate on that?
I can't speak specifically to that, but what I can say is that ridership is what we say in the business elastic to frequency. In other words, that the more frequency you provide, the more riders you get. And it's what we would term the more frequency gets you more riders than just adding the frequency would alone. So it's a compounding effect. So a lot of agencies make that decision looking at what the initial ridership is, but it's ultimately a financial decision towards how quickly you want to ramp up. So there's no right or wrong answer in terms of that ramp up period. It's a fairly complex decision.
Okay. And then also, too, on our ridership comparisons, where you took a look at our system, the ZEPRT, if you will, here. It's like I want to buy a vowel in there somewhere, right? Then you have the SMART, the Coaster, and the Sprinter. The Coaster and the Sprinter are both down in the larger San Diego metropolitan area, right? One performs better in terms of ridership. One didn't perform quite as well as our projection. And I'm just curious how that comports when we look at population comparisons. San Diego metro area, obviously a much larger population area. And you look at our population area where we think that we're going to perhaps perform better in some areas or perform better than like the SMART train, which also I think has a larger population area. How do we get to that ambitious conclusion that we're going to outperform those systems?
So part of what's maybe a little bit hidden, and we have there's materials presented a little bit earlier on this, is the ridership per capita. So the ridership per capita is a bit higher for the Santa Cruz branch line that we were modeling than two of those systems, the SMART and the Coaster, but not necessarily the Sprinter service. And one of the pieces that we had taken into consideration in the modeling are some of the unique tourist and recreation destinations that are serviced by this rail that are not as prominent, if you will, on the other systems, given their distance from the coast or the fact that they're a little bit more oriented towards sort of more commuter or other types of uses. So that part does play a fairly significant role, as Mark noted, the base ridership of around 3,500 boardings per day versus the higher end that had all of those, what we call special generators factored in, is part of what's picking up that difference. And just briefly, as we've been working on transit systems around the country, today the ridership component that sort of rebounded the fastest and in fact is above pre-COVID conditions is related to recreational and entertainment travel patterns. And in some systems, not quite a few in fact, the weekend ridership is above pre-COVID, and sometimes Saturday can be the peak service day. So it's those conditions that are more unique here in Santa Cruz County than what we see in San Diego or Marin County.
Okay, and just a couple more, if my fellow commissioners will indulge me here. Again, talking about ridership here. Now, as I understand it, there's a seating capacity on these train sets of 234. And is that for both trains that are coupled together in that train set that we're talking about, or is it per train?
It sounds like it's for the set.
And so it's for the set. So if my math is right here, in order to reach some of those ambitious ridership numbers here, just at 3,500, we're going to have to fill every seat on that train 15 times a day to reach that. And or if we're going to reach that 6,000, we're going to have to fill that 234 seat train 25 times a day. Is that a realistic? My question behind that is that really a realistic expectation? And
Again,
it's not meant to be a gotcha. I'm asking because I want to be educated on this.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, and the ridership levels for this type of rail system are not unusual for comparable systems that we see in the country. So using often multiple unit trains like this is being offered, that doesn't mean that every seat's always going to be full at all times. There are certain trains that will be busier than others. So I can just nominally state that the ridership projections that we have are within the range of similar systems around the country.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And I just have one last question here. As we looked at that slide that had the potential Beach Street alignments on that, and Riley, I don't know if you want to take that or not. I was a little confused. The one that showed it at surface level, is that a proposal to reduce Beach Street down to one lane in that?
Let's be green.
We've crashed the system, Riley.
Yeah. So the way you're referring to Beach Street, Santa Cruz,
Yes.
and the
thank
at-grade
you.
version, it would reduce Beach Street from the roundabout to Cliff Street
Yeah.
in one lane.
Okay.
There's options for what could be considered from Cliff Street to 3rd Street or 3rd Avenue. We can keep 2 lanes of traffic through there.
And then again, I realize we're just talking supposals here, but just to kind of get my head around this. In the alternative that you had there with the raised platform, and would the supposal be to keep that raised platform along that very same distance between Cliff Street and the roundabout?
So the elevated guideway, we call it, would be from the San Lorenzo River or coming underneath the Flume Ride and then shifting north onto an elevated guideway to Cliff Street. And that would be at an elevation of around 15 and a half feet between the ground surface and the under the part of the superstructure. Then we have to come down before we hit the roundabout in order to get through the roundabout and underneath the existing bridge, the West Street Bridge or West Cliff Bridge.
Almost sounds like it could be one of those rides on the boardwalk then. I'm just curious what my coastal commission friend would think of that raised platform, but that's a question for another day. Thank you both. And let me just thank you all for the presentation. I know that there's been a lot of hard work around this. Regardless of where you stand on this, there's been a lot of quality work that has gone into this analysis. I appreciate you bearing with me with my questions just to kind of help us get our head around it. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioners?
Yes.
Hernandez?
So, about a year and a half ago, we had that presentation with TIGM. And I was wondering, like, was there a discussion between like hydrogen and electric? And has any providers used electric? Because my only concern is that, if hydrogen fueling was as also kind of put in the formula, because it's difficult, I've been on Honda Insight platforms and they hate, having to find Google where their hydrogen filling station's at. And electric's so easy, it's.
So the short answer, yes, we considered it. Mark, did you want to share anything more?
Turn on the mic.
It was on a second ago. There we go. All right. Early in this conversation, as it got started, we had a lot of conversation in the community about what power sources would be. You will recall that was actually coming off the winter storms of 23, through which there was a lot of wind damage, tree falls, things along the corridor. And one of the concerns that we did here was the sustainability of overhead catenary running the length of the system. As it relates here, battery power is a challenge here, given some of the grades and the other things that occur and the ability to have a train run the length of the line with enough recharging to have a full service day. And we focused and got a lot of feedback on hydrogen because of the fact that it is an emerging technology that actually the state of California has been encouraging and has been a part of in the work that's being done in San Bernardino to bring hydrogen powered rail equipment to California and put it into service. From a safety perspective, it has been going through all of the required safety certifications to be allowed to operate in the corridor, and it's FRA compliant. And by that I mean, and this is specific to the multiple units, when we had the earlier conversations and we were asked questions about the TIGM vehicles and the demonstration of the work that had been done here previously with that interest, one of the challenges with that equipment is it does not comply with the certification requirements of the CPUC for safe operation in a corridor that's also being used for other purposes. If this were a dedicated travel way where there were no intersections and things to be crossed, that might be a possibility. But the state of California has very stringent what we call crashworthiness requirements as it relates to rail vehicles to not only protect the rail passengers, but also to protect other people in the community as it relates to the potential for incidents. And that vehicle currently does not comply. So in looking at the service and, again, the interest of having interoperability, FRA compliance was important in the conversation to ensure eligibility for the intercity rail program, which was one of the directions that you've provided to us as a commission.
So right now, in order to create sustainable rail, it'd have to be hydrogen. That's the only solution at this point?
It's not the only solution, but it is certainly a solution that's been advancing in the state because of what it provides in terms of zero emissions. And based on how that equipment operates and how it's been developed, it's been more frequent in a couple of European countries, but longer term, it's believed that it will have a lower cost of operation and maintenance because of reduced wear and tear on the type of equipment that it is from a motive standpoint.
And the fueling question?
Well, that gets back to the issue of not having a lot of historical information. As this project moves forward, this is a project that the timeline for implementation will be a number of years. And we are understanding and hopeful that fueling for hydrogen will continue to advance on a parallel track, no pun intended, so that we have the ability to more effectively fuel. But as you move forward through this conversation, clearly the type of fuel that's being used will be a part of your environmental consideration as well as you look at alternatives to ensure that this is the most prudent path forward.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And a question about ridership too. I've never heard the term elasticity, but I knew that was a concept, right? That the more ridership there is, the more people are going to get on it. Are we able to create a sort of hybrid model that has that elasticity, at least in the AM hours and PM hours when the highway is full, like 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. and then 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., to have that 30-minute run for those 2 hours, 4 hours per day, and then have the 1 hour after that? Would that be, because you want it to be successful. So if you have that elasticity during the peak hours and then settle it down during the rest of the day. Is that a possibility?
Would you like to answer that, Chris? Or? Yeah, no, that's certainly a possibility. And to Mr. Braylon's point earlier, that's a political and financial decision for all of you to make as you move forward. Because as ridership starts to build on a system and we see how it works at different times of the day, that will help inform what the travel patterns are. But also important to the point that was made, you have a lot of tourism travel that comes in and out of this county. That is an area where you have seen a lot of growth in recent years. And to Chris's point, a lot of transit agencies that are currently reporting that they are back to COVID or higher than pre-COVID levels of transit ridership, that ridership doesn't reflect what it looked like 10 years ago. And these travel models were built to look at what we call a home-based work trip, which is that time of the day that you're talking about, the morning, the evening, the times of the day that you would see the heaviest traffic. But as you all know from driving out here, you've got heavy traffic at 2:30 in the afternoon, right? And that's because people aren't doing that traditional work trip 5 days a week. But what communities have found is when people are making a travel choice for something that's not work specific, there's now a higher propensity in places where it's available for them to use transit than there was prior to COVID.
Well, thank you for all your guys' work on this.
Thank you.
Any other commissioners?
I have a few questions. Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you, staff, and thank you, HDR, for this report. I mean, obviously, this is just the executive summary and the presentation I think that we've had the opportunity to see as a commission, but it certainly provides some of the core numbers and I think really starts to paint a clear picture of what's before us with this project. A couple bits of feedback. First of all, like my colleague, Mr. Clark over there, I was a little bit perplexed by the interchangeable use of riders versus boardings. I mean, it seems like you've clarified a couple times that we're really talking about boardings every time some kind of ridership figure is mentioned, and I think we absolutely need to call those boardings so that riders are not confused with like unique users that might actually represent 2 trips likely in a day or whatever. I would also, I mean, I hear what you're saying about us being a tourist community and that leading to increased ridership, but still the fact that we're projecting our lowest possible ridership at 3,500 higher than SMART. I mean, SMART, I think, is somewhere around 2,700, 2,900 boardings a day. Right now, it's a system that has a population general area in both Sonoma and Marin counties. It's 2.7 times the total population of Santa Cruz County. So to be projecting an initial ridership that's greater than SMART seems pretty darn unrealistic to me, even if tourists are getting on the train. I also have a question about the feasibility analysis that might be included in the final report. We looked a little bit at operating expense per train revenue mile. I mean, that was sort of to get to an operating cost. But my understanding is that if we're going to go for grants, particularly with the federal government, that the FTA looks at a cost per passenger mile. Is that accurate, or what's the standard for comparing different systems?
So in the conversation as it relates to ridership and specifically what federal funding partners look at, that is an ongoing and evolving conversation as it relates to changes in guidance as well as the administration is focused. There were a couple of questions that came up Monday evening that we've had a discussion about some different ways that we can provide some comparisons on the cost per rider, other measures that we can report back to you as a part of the evaluation. The Federal Transit Administration has a very complex listing of criteria and data that has to be reported off of the ridership modeling as a part of a grant application. It's not just that cost per passenger mile. It's many other things, and they are weighted in different ways to come up with a recommendation as to whether or not the project gets funded. And so it's not just that number that's taken alone. There are projects that may be lower than others, but still score higher overall because of other benefits that they're providing back to the community. And those are benefits that not only have to do with land use and development, they have to do with greenhouse gas, environmental consequences, as well as how many new transit riders are being brought to the transit system because of that investment.
All right, well, I will just say that I think it'd be helpful to look at as many of those metrics as possible in the final report so that we have a sense of how competitive this project will be when going for federal funding, which we would obviously need to do. And I mean, even if cost per passenger mile is just one of several, it seems like that's a pretty important one to look at. The next question, I think this is for our executive director. What do you see as the minimum amount of the capital costs that we would need to be able to cover locally? I'm thinking about this as far as ultimately calculating, well, how big of a sales tax would we need? How much of that $4.28 billion number that was put out there should we be planning to say, like, yeah, we need to be able to cover at least what percentage?
Thank you, Commissioner Koenig. Generally speaking, for just the capital component, not counting the support, I would advise the absolute minimum grant match that we plan for be 20%, if not higher, because obviously the higher the local match, the more competitive the program is for outside funding because it shows that commitment. In terms of the support cost, which I think you're going to ask about next, is there's less grants for pre-construction components, and pre-construction meaning environmental, final design, right-of-way. Those components tend to be locally funded, the majority of those components locally funded. There are some competitive grants out there, but they're few and far between. And so, it's uncertain right now, but we could potentially get some federal or state funds for the pre-construction, but it changes, like the funding landscape changes with every federal administration. It changes with the state, priorities and policies over time. And so what staff can do is maybe consider a snapshot in time of today's landscape, subject to change based on future priority changes. So,
okay, so when you're talking about support costs, when in the abbreviated line item cost estimate for this that we saw, would that be the professional services line item, more or less, or would it be some subset of that?
yes, and maybe the team can answer where right-of-way is included. One of the things to consider is this was something that I've learned about recently is about the maintenance and layover facility that, obviously we own the corridor, but we don't have land in South County that RTC owns. So we would have to purchase, a decent parcel to build that facility. And so was that included in the professional services or a different line item? Thanks, Mark.
The cost of the land itself is included there is a line item for right-of-way. The activities that you're referring to in terms of the preparatory work to advance the project right now from a technical side is included within the professional services. So identifying that right-of-way, appraising it, all of those activities would be a professional service. The cost of the land itself would fall under that other line item. It's also worth noting, too, as we talk through this, and as Riley mentioned, as we work on a strategy over the summer for moving this project forward, there are two different primary funding sources through which this project could pursue funds, one being the Federal Transit Administration's process, the other being the Federal Railroad Administration's process. And one of the discussions earlier on about kind of the emphasis of this project was to align it with where it had the best opportunities for funding at the highest levels. And as the administrations stand right now, that is through the Federal Railroads Program as a part of the Intercity Rail Program. Now, admittedly, as Sarah said, with each administration, there's changes. Those changes affect the rules and how that those funds are going to be applied. But historically, the Federal Railroad Program, which is a newer program, has provided funding to as much as that 80% level that the director was referring to. On the Federal Transit Administration side, while the law says they can fund to that amount, historically, they have rarely gone above 50%. So that was a part of the conversation that we had as well in terms of identifying this as intercity service.
Okay. But, you know, kind of getting back to just trying to figure out what we would be on the hook for locally, for that $684 million in professional services, should we be looking at, or planning to basically be able to cover all of that cost or 20% of it?
It's uncertain at this time, and that is part of the work that staff plans to do over the summer, is to put together a bit more detailed financial plan for this project.
Okay. I think this is a question for our legal counsel, Mr. Mattis. Does the RTC have the ability to leverage taxes other than sales taxes? I mean, could we pass a property tax, for example? I mean, assuming that it was approved by voters, of course.
No, there's no specific authority under the state statutes for transportation authorities to levy anything other than a sales tax and in some instances a vehicle registration fee.
Okay. So if we're really just talking about sales tax, and it sounds like 20% of 4.28 billion is 850 million. It sounds like at the low end, if we're responsible for all of those professional services, the additional 684 million, and then just 20% of what's left over, we're on the hook for 1.4 billion. So then if you back that out, I mean, of course, we've got to consider bonding costs. We've seen how significant those can be in looking at trying to finance the portions of the rail trail that are currently underway. And if you assume 5% interest rate over a 30-year payback period, 1.25% debt coverage ratio, my friend ChatGPT here tells me that basically we'd need to be able to, so on the low end, come up with $70 million per year just for the capital costs. And then, of course, we need at least $34 million for operating. So that's $104 million per year that we'd need to generate in sales tax revenue. Keep in mind, Measure D currently generates a half-cent sales tax, $27 million per year. And then if on the high end, we'd need, potentially as much as $148 million per year if we're on the hook for that $1.4 billion amount. So, I mean, what this means for people's pocketbooks is really we're talking about either 2% sales tax increase all the way up to a 2.75% sales tax increase. City of Santa Cruz right now is at 9.75%. So, on the low end, we're now going up to 11.75, possibly as high as 12.5%. That would absolutely make us the highest sales tax in California. The highest right now is 11.25% in Palmdale and Lancaster. So it's just a pretty crushing amount. I mean, we were just talking at the Board of Supervisors trying to fill our own budget shortfalls, and we heard suggestions from our now former Health Services Agency director saying, hey, maybe we should consider a behavioral health sales tax in order to cover some of these shortfalls. I mean, we were just, the pressure on our local sales tax capacity, I mean, this would take all the oxygen out of the room for funding any other kind of service through sales tax pretty much ever again. So, yeah, that's pretty daunting. Then, of course, there's just funding the next phases of the study. So my last question for now is just where, to our executive director, where could we potentially get money just to fund the next phases of this study, and kind of what level of commitment are we talking about if we want to keep moving forward.
Sure. As Riley mentioned in his presentation, we do not have full funding for environmental, and we are looking at potential grant opportunities, one being the Federal Railroad Administration Corridor ID program, which is likely to be competitive, so it's not a done deal that we're going to just get, potentially up to 80% of the environmental funded. So we're definitely funding that or pursuing that. It's not going to be available for a couple of years. We're also still pursuing California State Rail Assistance funding, and that is a very uncertain funding source, but we're trying to keep tabs on it to try to get in line and potentially get a few million there. We've been pursuing that funding since the beginning of the concept development. And then we have the rail pot of Measure D, which in the expenditure plan allows for analysis of options, which does include environmental analysis. The challenge with that pot is that 8% of the measure is the sole funding source really for infrastructure preservation along the line. And so it's risky if you start really taking big chunks of it to invest in of the magnitude that would be needed. And then another consideration for that pot of funding is that we have not gotten reimbursed by FEMA for the 2017 or 2023 storms. And so we're looking at, if we don't get reimbursed, we're going to have to pay back or replenish those funds out of the Measure D rail category. So we have, pretty limited funds locally secured right now. But there are some potential opportunities out there. The other option is the discretionary funds that the RTC gets on every 2 years, and that's item 32 on the agenda, which we'll hear from later, is that, the RTC gets, cycles of funding from the state when we consolidate it all together, and then we have a call for projects when all of our member agencies and, apply for this funding. And that's also a potential source that the commission could commit funds toward this project to keep it moving forward.
Right. And of course, if we did that, then we're taking funds away from all of our local agency projects, our road projects, our road safety projects, et cetera, in order to keep advancing this report. In my mind, the primary goal with this entire study process was to determine whether or not this project is feasible. I think we have our answer. It's not. Simply from a financial standpoint. Unless any of my colleagues here think that they'd be willing to endorse a 2% sales tax increase.
Hearing none.
But I'll end my comments there and look forward to hearing from the public.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Cummings? Or Commissioner Martinez?
All right, well, thank you to the staff and to HDR for the information. It was really informative, and I'm still, as a new commissioner, getting up to speed on the project and just trying to understand all of the options before us. I know Commissioner Koenig was asking about that next phase. I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. We still have the environmental analysis, and did you say that's about 15 million?
Correct. I believe it's 15 to 60 million, right, Riley?
Estimated 14 to 16 million that we have need for.
And that could change the overall cost of the project.
Yeah, when Mark was elaborating on some of the risks that we've identified and that contingency amount that he referred to, the contingency amount reflects where we're at currently. As we go through the environmental process, some of those risks we get to investigate further. We get to know them better, retire some, maybe some of them we realize. So then we can refine the cost estimate as well as the contingencies.
Thanks. So that was my next question. So the contingency at about 20%, I think it was 20%?
20% for the capital operations.
Got it.
Or sorry, the operations and maintenance. Capital, I think, yeah, it was closer to 40. I think it was like 42 or so.
Oh, got it. Okay.
For the current stage.
And that's something that would be standard at this phase in the project and would be refined once the environmental analysis is complete?
That is correct.
And if we were to be able to fund 15 million for the environmental analysis, how long does that take?
For something of this size, at least 3 years, I would say.
And, you know, with the type of numbers that we're talking about, it's clear if this project were to move forward, it's a long-term project. You can't just build it and the entire thing's complete. So given that, and given that we've given directive to make this project as competitive for federal funds as possible, where would you start the project? Where could you imagine the first segment to be operable?
Right, so you're getting into some of what we talked about or referenced with the implementation strategy. I think you're referring to probably phasing the project. So if we were to phase the project, since we have Pajaro at the southern end, and that's a connection to the UP, we would start from there and work north. So part of the implementation strategy could look at, you know, specifically with the commission's direction, like what would a phasing look like working from south to north?
And so if we were to imagine, you know, starting a project to pilot, we'd be talking about starting in the Pajaro region and seeing what ridership would look like and sort of building from there.
Likely, that would be our recommendation at this point, because with that, we have the intercity connection at Pajaro. The commission could direct otherwise. You know, we could look at other phasing options, but for our project team, that's what we propose.
And if we were to move the phasing to, say, North County, where we're talking about a lot of the tourism and stuff like that, what would that do to the competitiveness of our project for some of those federal or state grants, federal grants?
So if that's something that we do look at, if we look at phasing from, say, Santa Cruz South or some other segment, we would need to look at holistically, how does that package get implemented as a whole ultimately? Because any project that would look for intercity rail funds, for instance, would have to show that you're going to have that intermodal connection. So we would have to look at it as a strategy over a period of time that would build out all the way.
Okay, so it sounds like it would be probably less competitive, or we'd really have to be able to show that we've got a full plan and project to make it competitive if we were starting in North.
Right. If in any phasing strategy, you would look at independent utility. Mark mentioned that statement. So you look at projects that you could come online that have, independent of the rest of the system, have their own utility, you know, cost benefit analysis and benefits there. So ultimately, if you're looking at how can we make this the most affordable or effective and attractive, you look at what are the things that we can do in the system that have the most bang for your buck, and you start there.
Thank you.
Anything you want to add on that, Mark? Okay.
And then just another question, probably for the consultants. In the prior conversation, we were talking about the bridges. One of the commissioners was sort of asking, you know, is this the Cadillac Bridge plan? And if so, could we get the Camry Bridge plan? And those weren't my comments, that came from a fellow commissioner, but I'm kind of wondering with regards to this project, is this all the bells and whistles, or is this kind of the standard level project to get us towards our goals?
This is a standard level project, and specifically to the question about the bridges were designed to freight standards because this is a shared use corridor with the intent of having freight service. There was some contingency that was allowed within that for a couple of the bridges which you have, which are iconic, that are things that are landmarks, that will be important to do something that the community will probably want that's a little more unique in design. But all in all, the construction as it was proposed was standard for a project like this without being gold-plated.
Thank you. Yeah,
I'm
well,
just happy to hear that we didn't buy the Ford Pinto project. So.
yeah, we wanted to run.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I want to thank you for the presentation, and I know that we aren't to a final report yet, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the public on what we have here, and I think that's coming up the next couple of months, and also really interested in looking at the numbers. I think that the price tag, I mean, every single person up here and in the room or in this county can see that price tag and, feel a knot in their stomach. So I think that it's important for us as commissioners to really look at the numbers, look at the options, look at the scenarios that have been presented, and have some discussions about that. So thank you for the information today.
Thank you, Commissioner Cummings.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for the presentation. I'm feeling a little bit more of an optimist here because, I think that over the course of time that we've been trying to implement the rail trail, this commission has been, and the commission staff have been really good at securing funding. Even when people think that it can't be done and it's going to cost us tons of money, this commission and the staff have been consistently really good at securing the federal and state dollars to help keep us moving forward. So I'm feeling a little bit more optimistic around continuing forward with this. But I do think that, there are a number of points that have been brought up around needing, where are the opportunities for savings? And so I'm just wondering, if there are any other options that we can consider. I mean, this is going after the, federal funds and trying to have the best project that's going to be able to attract that funding. But I'm wondering, even under those conditions, are there areas for, say, for example, the stations? Like, we see Sacramento, we look at San Jose and their light rail. Those stations are much less complex. They're more or less the platforms people get on and off. And so I'm just wondering if there are opportunities for savings here within this project that we can have another option come forward. Or if we weren't going to go, let's say we're not going to go after those federal funds, are there other types of rail options that we could consider that would allow us to save funding on the costs?
Mark, I'm going to pitch this to you. And I can fill in some gaps if I feel like there's something to add.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, part of the intent of implementation strategy, as Riley is describing, is to ensure that what's been defined as the project is maximizing where there are opportunities for funding to bring the most back in terms of federal and state investment into this corridor as it moves forward. As is required with a lot of those partners, as a project like this continues to advance, there will be a value engineering conversation at a point to determine if there are things that could be done more efficiently or more effectively. That's what has been envisioned. And then similarly to the comment about stations, what we have proposed in terms of stations right now are nothing elaborate. It's providing shelter and it's providing the basic amenities that a passenger needs to have to get on and off the train. Admittedly, an intercity service with a train of this length and with people waiting for a longer period than they might on waiting for a light rail service that's more frequent, need a little bit more in terms of space, as well as the platform has to be raised to specifically interface with the vehicle where it's put into place there. There are always opportunities as we continue to look at how we can refine the cost. But given what we know of the corridor today, the things that have been identified in the conversation about the bridge program, understanding the state of the right-of-way, and integrating both the railroad and the trail into long segments of this corridor, we believe that what's being put forward is a reasonable cost as it relates to a project that has not been over-designed.
And I'll add one thing to consider. This is a big number, right? And one thing that our project team was discussing as we prepared for today is some of the context around the number and the cost. And when you look at kind of what came before this concept, we looked at this rail line, looking at it kind of like as a rehabilitation or refurbishing of the existing rail line. And as we work through the kind of risks and some of the analysis that we've done as part of this team, is we're really looking at starting scratch with a lot of the rail infrastructure on the corridor. Meaning, we looked previously, could we reuse some of the ballast, some of the some of that type of material, and due to some of the alignment considerations that we had to bring forward in terms of the realigning portions of the rail, like particularly areas where there's not enough space to fit both a trail and a rail with the current alignment. We have to shift over the rail. We're really looking at taking down the existing tracks, ties, ballast, subgrade, and then starting from there and building up again. So it's not just rehabilitating the existing line, it's kind of rebuilding a new line. The only thing we have going for us compared to, like, say, a different line that would be building from scratch is we do have the corridor in place in the land for the vast majority of the project. We're keeping within the existing right-of-way.
So a follow-up to something that was mentioned earlier around, and thank you for that, around value engineering. I was wondering, is there also plans for any kind of external peer review? Because I know that for some of the other road projects, they'll have peer review and value engineering. So I'm wondering if there's going to be any kind of external peer review of this study when it's released.
Yeah, value engineering is a process that brings peers from other agencies at different levels and other projects to come in and share experiences, best practices, and lessons learned to ensure that what's being constructed is being done, as I said, in the most cost-effective and efficient manner as possible. And that is a process that a project like this will go through probably more than once as it progresses to the point of before you would begin construction.
On a value engineering process, when you look at other type projects, what type of percentage do you see change when you do a value engineering approach? Are we talking, 3 to 5%?
There's not really a set average, I would say, in terms of a goal of what's being achieved. And I can personally tell you that I've worked on projects where value engineering has actually raised the cost of a project. In times because in the zeal to cut costs on a project, an owner has removed something that is either going to make it difficult to the commissioner's point, align with what funding goals are from funding partners, or to meet specific requirements as required for safety of operation of the system. So the real intent of value engineering is to make sure that the right elements are included within the project to get it funded, to have it operate safely, but being done in the most cost-effective way possible.
Thank you.
So just following up on some of the ridership comments that came up, because one of the things we've noticed in the projections was that it didn't include the future growth from the Watsonville general plan or from the Santa Cruz downtown expansion plan. And so I'm just wondering, one, why those projections weren't incorporated, and if there's an opportunity to incorporate those projections, just given that we're going to see, population growth as these plans, these plans have been adopted, and as they're executed, we're going to see, major growth in populations. Especially, I can speak to Santa Cruz with the downtown expansion plan. Thousands of units going in, and then I guess a follow up to that too is also, were the different regional housing elements incorporated? Because again, in each of those elements, there's thousands of units of housing that are being proposed, and I think that if we're taking into account that future growth, that also can increase the demand that we'll likely see on these lines. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to the Santa Cruz downtown expansion plan, the Watsonville general plan, and then potentially to the housing elements that we've all been adopting.
So if those housing elements have been adopted, they are items that are included typically within the regional travel demand model that we spoke about, the Santa Cruz County model. Specifically to Watsonville, your general plan update that's in process, which I believe Farron Pierce is a part of helping you with the travel demand associated with that element. There's information that they had as a part of that process that's included in the add-on or the direct ridership modeling work that was done. Your general plan 2050 update as it stands right now is not fully included within that regional model, and it can't be because it hasn't been adopted yet. In the case of Santa Cruz, the downtown expansion plan, which was just recently adopted by council, will be included in an update that we will be doing in the coming weeks as we're going into the public conversation about this project. Unfortunately, that information in terms of the adoption of that plan wasn't received in time for us to be able to incorporate it into the data as it was presented this evening.
Thank you. And then last question. There's a number of stops that, I think many people in the community could see as being, high-use stops that weren't included. For example, Bay in California, that is a stop. That's a site where a lot of students, going up Bay Street, it's like, a couple blocks from the Bay and Mission bus stops, which are highly utilized. That wasn't included as a stop because I think, on the weekends, for example, Beach Street totally makes sense. But during the weekdays, in terms of students who are going to be trying to get to UCSC, like that Bay in California stop makes way more sense than going all the way to Natural Bridges, just because of the fact that, Natural Bridges, I think there's one line, the 20, that may, and actually, I don't think it even goes all the way down to the end of Natural Bridges, versus Bay in California, which would be a high-use stop. And so I'm just wondering, that's one. And then, with Capitola, there's, been a proposal for building more housing right near the shopping mall. And the fact that there's a mall there that's limping, but it's still there. But, having a stop on 41st Ave. And so I'm just wondering why those two stops weren't considered, because that could, that has the potential to increase ridership, which could help, justify the cost and help bring down those costs in terms of number of riders.
So going back to the word of the day, elasticity. There are a number of different options that we could continue to test and look at, and we'll work through with staff on some of those in terms of providing some feedback and possibly looking at a few of them further. When we started this analysis, we started with a propensity analysis, which was looking at existing data just in the regional travel demand model, in looking at new information that had been provided to us about land use, as well as understanding how the Santa Cruz metro system is being used today. And again, because we are trying to keep the travel time at a competitive range so that if you had the choice between driving between Watsonville and Santa Cruz or taking the train would be competitive to you. Each time we add a station to the system, it adds at least 2 minutes to that travel time between the two communities. So we were trying to hit a spot where we felt that it was competitive while addressing the key markets along the corridor for riders on and off the system, understanding that in some locations, while there's an option that might have been closer for some people, the location that we believed we were choosing was one that would serve more people or more riders at a specific time. I understand that in the two cases you referenced specifically, those stations were fairly close together. But at the same time, one of the things that we can look at and evaluate is what the trade-offs are. And it may be that one of those stations makes more sense than the other, but adding all of them in then becomes disruptive to the estimates in terms of overall ridership, because as we increase the travel time on the corridor, the evidence that we know is then that ridership goes down.
One last question. Sure. So just as we're having this conversation, I'm just thinking about in terms of the phasing of the project, if this were to move forward, would it likely be that the rail would get laid first and then we'd put in stations along the way, or would we kind of rail station at the same time, each like segment? Because I'm just thinking like there may be an opportunity to get if the rail's laid first, getting folks moving and taking the train, and as we build stations out, right? So it's like, we don't need every single station built in order for this thing to start moving. There could be opportunities to get the rail line down, build in the stations over time, seek fund, and as we seek more funding, we can get this thing moving, along rather than expecting to do everything all at once. And so I'm just wondering, what kind of opportunities there are there, and that being used as a cost-saving mechanism.
As we talk about implementation and the idea of phasing, that's certainly a part of the consideration that we can make. Again, as we discussed earlier, as I mentioned and Riley brought up as well, it's important that any project that we look at as a phase is something that has independent utility to make it eligible for the types of funding that we'd be looking to bring to the project. And again, that's a consideration, the type of input we'd like to hear from the community about what that implementation might look like in their minds in terms of doing things incrementally.
Great, thank you. That ends my comments.
Okay.
Agenda ZEPRT?
Thank you. Thank you. So I have a number of questions. I think they're pretty basic, but is my understanding that you could only move 134 passengers from point A to like beginning of the line to the end of the line?
I think the number was with 2 cars per vehicle, there's 234.
So 234 would be the maximum. And those are people standing and people sitting.
I believe that's a seated number, but one thing to clarify as a part of that as it relates to the ridership forecast and the span of service throughout the day. This is not in a ridership forecast is not suggesting that as Mr. Braylon mentioned, every train is not full. And not everybody that gets on the train at Watsonville is going all the way to Santa Cruz. And so when we look at the boardings at different points along the line, yes, there will be people who disembark at points along the line as well. And what systems and agencies do is look at what that span of service is, the number of trains, the number of seats that are available, what we can tell from modeling about the times of day that people are traveling, and making sure that at the points that there are peaks in what we see ridership looking for, that we have the capacity to carry those people. Again, as we go through this process, that will be an ongoing part of the evaluation, particularly as we continue to add in additional information as it relates to the general plans and the other plans that have been adopted that inform that model.
Sure. I think for many people who are proponents of this kind of clean train idea is that a lot of people would potentially be moved in the mornings and in the afternoons to get them off the highway, right? In cars that are potentially, polluting. But it doesn't, to me, if you can only send 2 cars with 234 people every 60 minutes, right? Maybe I'm not doing the math right. It's 45 minutes up and then the train has to return. What is the length of time from end to end with stops at every station? So
that's the time that's the 40 to 45 minutes.
That's 40 to 45,
Yes,
okay.
and what the calculation does when we talk about, for example, the 30-minute service, is it assumes that at any stop along that line, every 30 minutes, you're going to have a train going in the direction that you're headed, and those vehicles cycle through the system. So what the modeling does and the operations does is looks at the time to get from Watsonville to Santa Cruz. The train takes a short break for the benefit of the operator, for example, in Santa Cruz, and then it makes the return back the opposite direction while other trains are headed the direction it just came.
So it would remain parked there until the next train came up the line? Is that what you're saying?
No.
No.
No, there would be trains passing regularly along the line. It's, in essence, a train would leave Watsonville every 30 minutes and continue to Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
When it gets to Santa Cruz, there would be a short break. The train would then leave Santa Cruz and again make the trip back. Along the line on the route, as you look at the maps that are there are places where there are sidings that have been identified so that the train coming one direction can get out of way to allow the train going the opposite direction to pass. And in that way, it's a continual loop between the two cities.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful. So given the situation that we find ourselves in with federal dollars seemingly non-existent right now. We've had multiple grants pulled back. We're a sanctuary county. We're basically all sanctuary cities in this jurisdiction. So not only is California a target, then the sanctuary areas are targets. I don't see that we're going to be getting any federal grants anytime soon unless you know something different. What are the prospects of pulling down any federal money at this point?
So there's still a lot that is unknown about the programs and how they're going to be administered under this administration. I will tell you that from the Secretary's office, they've made it clear that they are still planning to invest in large infrastructure as they move forward. But I also emphasize a comment that your director made as well as Mr. Gerbrandt about the timing and the work that's required to get through this process. There's a certain amount of this work to advance the project, including the environmental work, that you need to continue to do to qualify for that federal funding. It's going to take a few years to get through that process. And by that time, if there's a change in administration, the rules could all change again.
Okay.
That's been a cyclical thing through every administration change for decades, and the rules will change. So today I cannot sit here and tell you with clarity what the rules will be at the time that you're ready to make that request for federal funding.
Thank you. And what is the biggest grant received by the RTC to date for the rail and trail?
Oh.
I think I know, but I don't want to be wrong.
For rail and trail, or
For the corridor.
for
yeah.
the corridor?
Aside from like the initial 14 million that we got to buy the corridor.
Sure.
yeah.
Well, technically, the RTC we're not the recipient. It would be County of Santa Cruz got, I believe, $67 million ATP grant, Active Transportation Program grant. That would be the largest
Okay.
off the top of my head.
So 67 million's the largest that we've received. We're going to need 4,200.
That's for the trail, yeah.
Yeah, with the trail. We're going to need, apparently, to complete this project, $4,280 million. That's 4.28 billion. 4,280. Right? I'm doing the right math.
Yes.
Okay.
Billion with a B.
Got it. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to say is the citizens in this county have typically supported sales tax increases. However, having said that, we have PBUSD in the Mid and South County. We have 2 bonds on PBUSD, several bonds on Cabrillo, several CSA assessments for fire. PV Fire just went out for an assessment, didn't get it, so now they only have 2 people on their fire engines, and they can't actually go into a burning building if they arrive because they only have 2 firefighters because they didn't get the assessment they needed because the citizens in that area are tired of paying extra taxes. The cost of insurance, people's insurance, my 2 neighbors have been canceled on either side of me. I'm just waiting any day that I'll be canceled too. They're on the FAIR plan now. It's almost $12,000 a year for them to insure their homes. People are tired of shouldering the burden of communities that can't make ends meet. We've got a metro system that is running at deficit and has been at a structural deficit for several years. In my district, there's many bus stops that have no shelters. So it just makes me kind of laugh when we talk about a nice train station that's going to have a shelter and blah, blah, blah. I have need for bus stops in my area, which I don't have. Sarah, you have the most experience out of anybody, I think, on your team. You're an engineer. You've been doing this a long time. I'm going to ask you right now, do you think this is feasible at these costs? and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I feel like you actually know better than many people.
So I will not say this project is infeasible. I will say any project is feasible with enough money and enough community support. And so if, this is an ambitious project, you are correct. This project is very expensive for our community. But if we prioritize this project over other needs and we are serious about delivering this project, our team is going to figure out how to get it done.
Okay, so I'm going to say two more things. The first thing is any effort to take money away from roads and infrastructure, I would never support that. We're underfunded in our infrastructure needs and our road repair. I've got constituents everywhere in District 2 that are furious about the condition of their road, and I don't blame them. So I would not be in favor of swiping any of the road funds in order to push it towards the rail project. That's number one. And then number two, we have a way to preserve the rail line right now for future, and that's called rail banking. And I've asked, and I think Eduardo's asked for a report to come to this full board, and so that the public can hear what it is, what it affords, and if it's possible for us in this situation. If we're aiming to build this thing out in 15 years, I'll be 73. My husband will be 85. I don't think it's feasible at these costs, but I think if we want to preserve the rail line, we need to maybe look into figuring out a way to preserve the corridor for the future. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just one more comment. If you're going to bring it back for comments, I can wait, but
Yeah,
one
I
final-
can wait because I got Commissioner Kelly then.
Well, of course. No, this is just sort of my final comment on it, and just to keep up with the math prowess of my colleague there, Supervisor Koenig. For those of you who have not yet become anesthetized to this number of $4.2+ billion with a B, just to put some perspective around it, that equates to the entire budget for the 4 cities in our county: Santa Cruz, Scotts Valley, Capitola, and Watsonville. Our entire city budgets would have to be dedicated to this, comparatively, for 16 years. And I just want to put that perspective around what this number means, because sometimes you look at a number like 4.2 billion, you go, well, but that's what it looks like. And that's the level of commitment. And I believe the director when she says, if there's the will and the funding to do it, her team will do it. Absolutely have confidence in her and her team to do that. However, that's the level of commitment that we would be talking about as a community to dedicate to this. And that's the crux of the decision point. Thank you, Commissioner Keeley. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Kelly.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if I could get a little bit of guidance from you. Is your intent after commissioner questions to go out to the
Yes.
public and get them? When that's completed, I would appreciate the opportunity. I think there might be a motion that might be helpful, but we'll do that later. Thank you,
Yeah.
sir.
Thank you. With that, I don't see any other comments. I just have hopefully a simple comment or question. We talked about a lot of rail assumptions. What about freight assumptions?
Yes, so the project concept does include analysis of the freight rail interface. And I had some notes prepared on that. And I think you're just asking, is freight included? Where's freight?
Yeah,
What's
we're
happening to freight?
included. How is that going to be interfaced? Because every 30 minutes, how how are we going to get the trains off the road? Or
So the question is, what do we do with freight if passenger rail is operating? Okay, so yes, so the executive summary does have a section on it. The project concept does cover it. In summary, we looked at how freight and passenger rail would work together. Two strategies we've identified for how that would happen. One is what we call temporal separation, which is operating at different times. So freight would operate at one time, passenger rail at a different time. They wouldn't intermix. Another is what we call alternative approaches under current Federal Railroad Administration existing programs. If you want more information, Mark can elaborate, but it's basically using kind of some existing alternatives for making them work together. Key thing is we're going to continue to coordinate on how to preserve the future interoperability of freight and passenger rail, so they both will be able to coexist.
Do we have any assumptions that there is any vendors, usage?
Say that again?
Like any usage? Is there like, currently there's only like vendors from Watsonville to south. Do we foresee any future, people using the red line for freight?
So there's been ongoing usage for freight, and there's been, consistently usage in city of Watsonville. There's current vendors. The freight operator is always looking for new vendors. They tell us, the current operators tell us that, yes, they do get inquiries every year from new people looking for new opportunities. So yes, they exist. One of the challenges with expanding is getting consistent interest from markets north of Watsonville because of current infrastructure conditions on the rail line. So assuming that challenge goes away, then that opens up, opportunity for additional vendors and additional markets.
Okay. Thank you. With that, I'm going to go out to the public to weigh on this item of the agenda. You have 1 minute.